So, manifesto week this week in the election campaign. First up with the Lib Dems. Will, you were there. What was the tone of it all?
I think the Lib Dems seemed very upbeat. They know there's a big opportunity for them. This is a party that peaked in 2005 with, I think, 62 seats. And then in 2019, they were reduced to 11 on their sort of disastrous Stop Brexit manifesto. Brexit gets very little airtime in this manifesto. It's briefly mentioned in the introduction, and then the actual policy is sort of the second to last page, I think. And it concentrates a lot more on how they would raise about 27 billion quid and what they would spend it on. And foremost in that package is a big package of care, social care and NHS spending.
Yeah, we've mentioned it a few times on the podcast that they're the only party really actually talking about social care. And we've had that very moving video of Ed Davey both talking about looking after his son, but also his mum, and he brought that up again today. Those health and social care pledges are key to the manifesto, aren't they? Mm-hmm. What are some of the features of what they're promising here?
So they're talking about spending about, it's talking about spending 8.3 billion on ending the crisis in NHS and social care. One of the big parts of it is ending the two-child benefit cap, which obviously has been a sticking point for Labour. There's also free personal care, it was described as. So people would not need to pay were they to need social care. Obviously, that would be sort of.
That's what they've got in Scotland already, isn't it?
I think the problem that they have, though, is how they're going to pay for that, because they also unveiled this package of tax rises, mostly on businesses. And Ed Davey, in his speech, took care to sort of talk. He used the words like carefully costed and fully costed again and again. And there is a document which I have in front of me with the how they're going to raise that money, but it doesn't go into a huge amount of detail. And some of the ways in which they say they're going to raise that money seem pretty questionable to me. So it's things like some of the smaller stuff is stuff like taxing companies when they do share buybacks, which a lot of companies, if you just tell them they're going to do that, they will raise money in different ways rather than selling shares. They'll use debt, or they might just decide not to list their shares in London and list them in America instead, which a lot of companies already do. There are things like extra taxes on people who fly a lot, but then you have to find out how are you going to identify how many times people
Well, you've got
fly
your passport
per year.
every time you've got to fly, haven't
It's
you?
true, but there is a new system though that needs to be HMRC will have to do a whole bunch of work. How much is that going to cost, and how much money are they going to get out of it? And there are things like windfall tax on oil and gas, more of a windfall tax, which will probably work, but it's only going to work once. It's a one-off thing. And so there are all these things that you can get the numbers to add up if you squid, but I think there are a lot of things to accept if you are going to say that it is fully costed.
I mean, the reason they have to find so much money is that some of these pledges are really quite startling. 8,000 more GPs. They want to guarantee the right to see a GP within 7 days or within 24 hours for emergencies. Cancer patients to start treatment within 2 months. I think that's 62 days. We haven't hit that target for absolutely yonks. That's a technical term. And putting mental health on equal footing with physical health. These are things that really matter to people, but they're going to be incredibly expensive, aren't they?
Well, I think maybe I'm being really cynical here, but I think the point is they're not expecting to actually do any of it. They're not even expecting to be in coalition. All the talk a couple of months ago about would Ed Davey go into some kind of arrangement with Keir Starmer in a hung parliament. We're not looking at that scenario. So they can spend whatever money they want in their manifesto because they're not going to have the job of actually delivering on those promises. This manifesto, the purpose of it is to win them as many very targeted seats as possible, win them primarily in the vast majority of cases from the Conservatives. And Ed Davey's aim is to be the third biggest party rather than behind the SNP. So really it's the SNP that he's trying to beat here, not Labour or the Conservatives. And then maybe to move the conversation when Labour are in power to sort of say, well, Labour are doing X, Y, Z. We promised in our manifesto that we would do 10 times that amount. So I'm not saying it doesn't add up. Will is saying that. I'm saying that it doesn't necessarily need to add up to achieve those aims. I do think the focus on care, though, is interesting because that's something that neither the Conservatives nor Labour want to talk about at all because it is just too expensive. It is a multi-decade problem that the various parties have kicked down the road again and again and again. I did find that video that Ed Davey made incredibly moving, and I think it's good that the Lib Dems are raising it as an issue. Again, they're raising it as an issue knowing that they're not going to be the ones who have to implement the solutions.
But do you think it is important that it is being talked about? Because the only way that as a nation the care crisis is going to be tackled is if there is cross-party support for it, because it's so expensive. There needs to be buy-in, right? In
terms of the spending, I think it also needs something a lot more radical than saying we're going to put in an extra, 8.7 billion. You need to do something quite different, possibly to do with the way in which it's sort of funded and administered, largely through council tax. Like the council tax system is really quite regressive. And the way in which councils administer things is quite broken up around the country, and that's arguably a lot of the reason it's so expensive. So you need to have an enormous political fight about. I don't think any of the parties think that you would be able to completely overhaul the council tax system. That requires an enormous political fight between national and local government, and were you to have all three of the main parties supporting it, that might be the only way it was winnable. The manifesto is more than 100 pages long, and it only came out a few hours ago, so we can't take our listeners through it in its entirety, but just some of the other headlines. Extra free childcare available to disadvantaged children, boosting maternity and paternity pay, extra child benefit for 1-year-olds. Obviously, these all cost money. More money for schools, a mental health professional in every school. For the farming and rural communities, extra support, expanding rural fuel duty. You've already touched on this frequent flyer tax for those who fly more. No mention of actually reducing immigration numbers, but they have said that they will scrap the recent ban on foreign care workers bringing dependents. Tonally, to both of you, very, very much anti-conservative as opposed to we're the third option. They've tended to take that attitude in the past. We're not Labour and we're not the Conservatives, but it's very, very much anti-Tory this year, isn't it, this election campaign? Yeah, and I think the key issues that they are stressing are NHS funding failure, healthcare problems in the healthcare service, the cost of living crisis, and really the environment and sewage and water companies, which Will did an excellent cover feature on a couple of weeks ago. And these are the issues that are of utmost importance in blue wall, Conservative, Lib Dem, marginals. It's very much an offering to disillusioned, apathetic Conservative voters. Look, you don't like Labour. We understand that you don't like Labour. Vote for us instead. And not much of a vote for us for the sake of voting for the Lib Dems. Also, some of it, I think, is kind of incoherent. They've got building 350,000 new council and affordable homes. If you look at what Lib Dem councils and Lib Dem MPs do repeatedly in their patches, it's block development and block new homes, and they're never the right kind of homes. So again, you've got this national vision in contrast to what the Lib Dems actually do on the ground, but it has proved really quite successful for them in by-elections, and I think they're trying to run this campaign as a series of by-elections in key seats that they think that they can win. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about the disillusioned blue wall voter. Like, there are things like also bringing back like rural bus routes that have closed, is investigating every burglary. There's quite a lot of stuff that would be, go down all right with readers of the Daily Mail, I think, in certain constituencies. But that's the opportunity now, isn't it? It's just for parties to hold up a big sign saying we're not the Tories, that this is to a certain extent a country that does or doesn't vote Conservative and will not be voting Conservative in this election. So who's going to grab those voters.
And that was the message from the local elections, which is if you look at vote share of Labour and the Lib Dems, in some cases underwhelming. If you look at the number of council seats they won, hugely efficient. Getting the anti-Tory vote out proved very successful then, and that was only 2 months ago.
Big pledge from the Conservatives today is to recruit 8,000 new police officers. They've had a bit of a kicking on this already today during the media round, because various journalists have pointed out that police officer numbers have fallen quite considerably under their watch, and they're coming back up. And actually, my old colleague Ben Chew, who's at the BBC, has been doing some analysis. And if you look at officer numbers per 1,000 people in the population, and they're quite significantly down. My own analysis, and forgive me, my maths is a bit rusty, but my reckoning, even if you added the 8,000 now, you wouldn't actually get back to the same levels that we had in 2010 if you're looking per capita. So there's that. You've also got to take into account that the officers that you're losing are those who are most experienced. Labour, they're pledged to create 100,000 additional childcare places and 3,000 nurseries. How's this one going down?
Well, the Labour plan is to convert disused classrooms, because we know the birth rate has been falling. So we have lower pupil numbers in schools, and the idea is to turn some of that space into nursery placement. And it's part of a wider Labour vision of integrating early years childcare with the primary school system, which is something that Bridget Phillipson has talked a lot about. Obviously, the only reason they're able to do this is because the birth rate has fallen, in part because having children and childcare is so expensive. So it's a bit like, we're going to use the free school classrooms we have because no one's having any children, because childcare is so expensive. But I think this is going to prove one of the...
Do we know that's the only reason people are not having children?
We know that having children is very expensive.
Yes, it is. But it's also very rewarding.
But childcare, I think, is going to be integral to the Labour manifesto, and their offering to parents, to basically to working parents. And I know that there was a lot of frustration in the Labour camp a year and a bit ago when Jeremy Hunt introduced more free childcare provision, because that was very much going to be Bridget Phillipson's flagship policy. So they're trying to suggest that the way the Tories have done it is shambolic, and they will do it better and in a more integrated way, essentially saying to parents, that thing that you've been offered by the Conservatives that isn't going very well, we're not going to take it away from you. You can trust us to continue with it, even though, as with all of these things, it costs an awful lot of money.
Well, and the main issue with both parties' proposals, both then with Jeremy Hunt and this, is that are the staff there to actually work in these new nurseries offering these additional places?
One other thing about as you said, Hannah, with the police officers, it doesn't get you back to where you were in 2010. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has said that's also the case with the Lib Dems care pledges. However generous they might be in comparison to what you have today, it doesn't get you back to where you were before austerity. Which shows you, just how deep the cuts have been since 2010. But to undo them is a work that exceeds the kind of fiscal room that any of the parties have in these manifestos.
Well, on that gloomy note, let's wrap up. Tory manifesto tomorrow, Greens on Wednesday, and Labour Thursday. So big week. And then we have the next leaders event as well on Wednesday. Not a head-to-head debate.
Thank goodness. No, they're going to get a good grilling instead of going head-to-head and just coming out with sound bites.